Hello everyone, welcome to Almighty Tricks. Today we will be understanding I of solid. So I stands for Interface Segregation Principle, or in short we can say ISP. Let's see the definition of ISP first. So ISP is saying a client should never be forced to implement an interface which is not used by the client. Or we can say a client should never be forced to have those methods which are not used by the client. Okay, so let's understand this with simple example. Say there is a company, and in that company there are two types of workers are working. One is worker and super worker, and they get some breaks to have their food. So basically, this worker can work for 10 hours, and super worker can work for 16 hours, and they can work with they can have the food. Okay, and similarly super worker also can work and they can eat or they can have the food. Okay, so how can I design this type of system? So I can have one interface called I worker interface, and I can have two methods, that is work method, and I can have food method. Why? Because these two worker can work and can have the food, so I have created this work method and have food method. And now I can have two classes who can implement this two we can implement this interface. Okay, so I can have two classes. One is normal worker. Why two classes? Because we have two workers, right? Worker and super worker. Okay, and another is super worker. So if we implement this worker and super worker classes with the iWorker interface, then it will force us to override this work and have food methods, right? So I need to override this. So work method and have food method here also. Similarly, here also I need to override work method, then have food method. Okay, so basically this is satisfying the ISP. Okay, let's take another example here. Let's say I need to support another worker, that is robot. Okay, so robot will work for 24 hours, and robot can only work, they no need to have any food. So let's create one class here, that is called robot. So observe one thing, if I implement this interface, iWorker interface, then again it will force us to override these two methods, right? So let me override these two methods, work method and have food method. Okay, so basically if you see in this class this have food method is not used, right? It is not used because robot can only work, robot cannot have the food. So it is forcing us to override these two methods, which is violating ISP here. This is violating ISP. So how we can resolve this one? So to resolve this, we can do one thing. We can have two interface, and we can have these two methods in each interface. What I am saying, let's say I am creating two interfaces. Let's say I work, and I can have another interface that is called I feed. Okay, so I work have the work method, and I feed will have the have food method. Okay, now what I'll do, I can have worker class here, and I can have super worker class here. Okay, so basically worker and super worker can work and can have the food, right? So what I'll do, I'll implement these two interfaces. Okay, I'll implement these two interfaces. As I am implementing these two interfaces, then it will force us to override work method and have food method, right? So let me override here work method and have food method. Similarly here also it will override work method and have food method. Okay, now see about how we can implement the robot, as robot was breaking ISP previously. Okay, so let me create robot class here. Okay, so basically robot can work, robot cannot have the food. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll implement only I work here. Okay, so now it will force us to implement force us to override the work method. So as we are not implementing this I feed, so it will not force us to override the have food method, right? So now it is satisfying ISP. Okay, so let's check this in practical. So if you see, I have created this ISP package inside this com.solid package, and I have created this iWorker interface. iWorker will have the void work method and have the void have food method. And I have created two classes, that is super worker and worker class. So worker class implementing iWorker interface, which so as we have two methods in the iWorker interface, so it will force us to override these two methods, which is fine for the worker class. Similarly for super worker class, I am implementing this iWorker interface, and it is forcing us to implement this work and have food method, which is fine. So I have created another class called robot. So it is also implementing iWorker interface. So as I am implementing iWorker interface, so it will force us to implement these two methods. Okay, that is work and have food. Basically, this have food is invalid in this class, right? In this robot class, right? So robot cannot eat the food, so it is forcing us, which is violating ISP. Okay, so let's check how we can solve this. Let me create another package called solution inside this ISP package. So in the solution, what I did, I have created two interface, that is iWork interface, which will have the work method, iFeed interface, which will have the have food method, and I have created three more classes, that is worker, super worker, and robot. So let's check one by one. So in the worker class, I have implemented so worker can have the food and can work, right? So I have implemented iWork iFeed, because iWork will have the work method, iFeed will have the have food method. Okay, so I have implemented two interfaces, so I need to override these two methods. Similarly, super worker can have the food and can work, right? So I have implemented two interfaces, so it will force me to implement these two methods. But in robot class, robot can only work, robot cannot eat. So what I did, I have implemented only one interface, which is having the work method. So it will force me to implement or force me to override this work method. So let's check the diagram first. So if you see, we have two interfaces, iFeed and iWork, and super worker and worker both are implementing iFeed interface and iWork interface, but robot cannot eat, right? So robot only implementing iWork interface, which is having work method. So this is about ISP. Hope you understood this concept. Thank you for watching this video.